Thanks everybody for joining today. Really excited to have everyone on today and taking time out of your afternoon or evening or whatever time it is, wherever you are. I'm really looking forward to chatting about this topic here. So looks like we have a pretty well represented international group here. So that's really exciting. Appreciate. I'm sure it's kind of late at night or early in the morning in certain places. So appreciate you taking the time out to check this out. So my name's Eric. I'll do a quick introduction myself in a minute here, but again, what I'll be talking about today is this topic I like to call the business of behavioral science, and kind of talk about what we know about psychology and things like behavioral economics, and how you can kind of apply that to your business or your company, and anything related to those. So here's let me move this here. So just a quick, rundown what we'll do here. So first of all, I'll do a quick introduction to myself and a little bit of background on myself and the team that I work on that applies this. And then what we'll do is walk through kind of a framework for solving business problems using behavioral science. So one thing I double check is, like, how many people are familiar with kind of behavioral science or behavioral economics or any of those fields already? Let me know in the chat. Is there anybody that's not familiar with behavioral science? Okay, cool. Yeah, I think with this type of group, we probably, most people probably have at least somewhat of an introduction to this. So again, what I'll cover is a little bit more of this. So first of all, I'll just do a quick introduction to myself. So my name is Eric, and I'm the Marketing Optimization Manager at Morningstar here in Chicago, Illinois. So Morningstar is a leading provider of independent investment advice. And ultimately, we have a lot of different kind of products and services that leverage independent research and software products to ultimately help people at every stage of kind of their financial lives. So a lot of it focuses on investing, whether it's someone who's a financial advisor, and we help them, provide the tools to serve their clients better, or just people who are managing their own portfolios or just trying to save money for retirement. We have a lot of solutions for everybody, kind of every stage of their financial world there. So what I'm a part of is what we call our behavioral insights team. So we're a group of trained PhD researchers and also just general industry practitioners who focus on applying what we know about behavioral science and psychology to ultimately help investors and industry professionals overcome their behavioral biases. We all know, for everyone who's relatively familiar with the field, that there's just a lot of things, a lot of kind of tricks our brain plays on us that can kind of hurt us from achieving the things we want to achieve. And this is especially true in finance. There's a lot of behavioral biases that jump in, kind of wreck people from working towards the financial goals that they have. So what we do is we try to do research and apply that research within the company to help people overcome those biases and make the best decisions and ultimately reach their financial goals faster and more efficiently. So outside of our team, we also partner with some of the top researchers around the country in this kind of behavioral finance space. And we partner with them to run kind of independent research, like academic style research, to ultimately understand how people make decisions with their money, and how we can, more importantly, develop solutions that make it easier to reach people's financial goals and kind of get around the way people actually think, not the way we hope that they think and behave. So again, it sounds like just a quick introduction to the topic at hand. It sounds like, I think, especially the conversion Excel style audiences, most people are probably pretty familiar with behavioral science in general, at least in some capacity, and at least you all work in marketing, so you probably know a lot about consumer psychology and things like that. So just to quickly kind of define behavioral science the way that I'll kind of talk about it today. So behavioral science is what we consider kind of a cross-disciplinary approach to understanding our mind and its decision-making process. And it's kind of a combination of a few different types of psychological studies, mainly social psychology and cognitive psychology, and also draws a lot from economics. So ultimately, the birth of this field came, in the last, 20, 30 years, when some economists and psychologists kind of overturned this common assumption that generally humans seem to, carefully think through their choices and ultimately pick the, best decision for whatever their outcomes are. But what we've kind of found is that we often don't act in rational ways that, maximize our utility or actually get us to where we want to go. We seem to make a lot of seemingly irrational decisions that take us further away from the things that we want to do. So as behavioral scientists, we try to kind of understand that and understand why that happens, and then more importantly, how we can kind of build solutions within every part of our lives that help people kind of overcome our worst mental tendencies and get us to where we want to go. And ultimately, a lot of these things tend to happen in pretty predictable patterns. So a lot of these behavioral biases that we have and these, rash emotional decision making, we do tend to make these in a relatively predictable manner. So knowing that we can make that a little more that's a little more predictive, we know that we can build solutions for those predictable decisions. So the field has really exploded in academia in the last 20 and 30 years, and we've really kind of learned there's really an explosion of kind of academic research, understanding how we think and how our brain works and how we make these decisions. But we've only kind of just begun scratching the surface of taking all of this outside of that research and applying it in the real world. And one area that I think is especially kind of lacking in applying this is the business world. So far we've seen a few different areas pop up where people are using this. One notable one is in government. So the Behavioral Insights team in the United Kingdom and the Social and Behavioral Sciences team in America are two kind of premier groups of researchers that work with the federal government to run behavioral style academic studies and research, help the government run more efficiently and help kind of citizens make better decisions. And outside of kind of the government area, we've seen a lot of kind of consulting shops pop up. So Ideas 42 and Irrational Labs are two big ones that work with clients from the private sector and also from nonprofit public sector areas like that. So we've seen a bunch of these groups pop up and that are regularly applying this sort of stuff in a really positive way. But business has kind of been lacking for whatever reason. If you ask the average CEO or executive about what behavioral science is, they'll almost all know it. They probably read one of the big books and they have this kind of general understanding of this kind of decision-making process. But if you ask them how they're applying it within their company or how they would like to apply it, you'll generally kind of get some blank stares. Like everybody kind of knows what this stuff is and they're interested in it, but we haven't quite bridged that to the application. So ultimately what I want to do is start thinking about how we can kind of systemize this and make what we know, all this interesting theory that we know from academia, make that applicable in the real world and with companies and make that kind of a repeatable process. So that's what I'll do today is kind of walk through this initial framework that we're working on here at Morningstar. And then we've also pulled in from some other industry leaders and colleagues in the field for how this can kind of all be applied in a systematic way throughout a business and an organization. So I'll run through kind of 4 key areas here and then wrap things up. And I should have plenty of time for questions afterward, but feel free to jump in with any questions during the chat and I'll try to answer them throughout it if I can, or otherwise we should have plenty of time at the end. So please ask your questions as they come up, and I'm looking forward to kind of getting your feedback and discussing with everyone. All right, so, and my last meme here. So we'll take all this, as I mentioned, business hasn't quite been applying this quite as much as these other areas. So ultimately we can take this framework and we can solve all these business problems and be really happy and successful like this guy in our own businesses and companies. So now with all that introduction out of the way, we'll jump into the framework here. So the first thing I want to talk about is product generation. So ultimately, the first thing we can do using behavioral science is take this kind of theory and process and really use it to provide the motivation for new and improved products. When we have a better understanding of the habits and behaviors that consumers are attempting to change, like things like exercising more or contributing more money to retirement, then we can develop, with that understanding, we can develop new solutions that bridge the gap between intention and action and get them to where they want to go. So to think of a kind of a simple example, let's think of cooking. So most people want to cook, but most people don't do it. And it's especially true in kind of the millennial generation. So according to some market research, about 80% of millennials say that, they want to be cooking at home and they think it's better to be cooking meals at home. But when we flip that with the actual data of their behavior, they're actually eating out more than any generation before them. And according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, people ages 15 to 24 only spend an average about 11 to 17 minutes daily on food preparation. So this is kind of a classic behavioral economics intention action gap, where we have a lot of people saying they want to cook, they want to learn how to do it, they want to make healthier meals at home, but they ultimately just don't get around to doing it. So what can we do to use behavioral science to solve this? We can make it easier for people to do what they already want to do. So the best example of this is Blue Apron, which I'm sure most people are familiar with. It's become kind of a giant in the food industry. And ultimately, it kind of solved this problem by taking that intention of wanting to cook more. It's making it a lot simpler to be able to do it. Ultimately, the service just removes the hassle factors of cooking by providing recipes and all the ingredients for those recipes to its customers in a package that's easy for them to understand and easy for them to implement. And this has led to pretty massive business success. According to Recode, the company is on its way to about $1 billion in sales over the next year, just by kind of bridging that gap and helping people do something they already wanted to do in a more efficient way. So this is what gets into what we call product generation, where we can use what we know about this behavioral science knowledge and how people behave and what they want to do and what their goals are. And we can develop new solutions that bridge that gap between that intention and action that consumers have. So in behavioral economics, they call this the intention-action gap. This is one of the kind of the classic conundrums of behavioral science, where so often we all have things that we say we want to do, but we just don't actually follow through and end up doing. So, like in the example before, it was cooking. We all say we want to cook, but then we end up, ordering food in or grabbing Chipotle on the way home every day. Or the common ones are exercising or eating healthier, like eating more vegetables, or maybe saving more money. These are all things that we know we want to do, and we know there's a lot of benefit, but in the heat of the moment and our day-to-day lives, we just don't really follow through with that. So there's a ton of products that have kind of emerged to help solve these problems for a bunch of these different areas. In personal finance, there's apps, kind of budgeting and personal finance apps like Hello Wallet and Mint, which help people kind of manage their money and save more. And there's apps like Acorns and Digit, which kind of automate savings and investing. Things like dieting, apps like MyFitnessPal and Noom help people kind of track their food intake and how healthy they're eating. And then in fitness, wearables like Fitbit are essentially built to get people more active and get people moving more and burning more calories. And then things like Runkeeper or Strava help people track running and like motivate them to run more or bike more. And then there's a lot of apps that just help people build better habits. There's a Stick, which provides a kind of accountability for habits and behaviors you want to take, and Pavlok, which is a similar thing on the wearable front, and apps like Coach.me that just help people track their habits and encourage long-term behavior change. So what to do with this kind of concept? So ultimately, it's about finding these behavioral problems that consumers or your existing customers have and creating products that can solve them. So to find ways to solve them, you can use the behavioral literature and research, and ultimately the research process, which I'll kind of cover a little bit more later, to really find what these problems are and create solutions that fill in those gaps, those behavioral gaps, or whatever it is that's blocking people from doing what they want to do. And then we can use this product optimization process, which I'll cover in the next section, to kind of generate all these ideas quickly and rapidly test them and make sure they're having the impact that we want them to have. All right, so that's the first section, which is kind of generating these product ideas. So once you have a product, you have to make sure that it's effective. So if you identify these kind of behavioral barriers people have and you build this great product that can help solve it for people, then you have to make sure that it actually works. So you can't promise to solve users' problems and not deliver, or else they're not going to stay, and ultimately your business won't survive. So for this, we turn to a process we kind of at Morningstar call product optimization. So for example, let's consider personal finance and saving money. So Hello Wallet, which I mentioned a couple slides ago, is a kind of personal finance and budgeting tool, which was a subsidiary company of Morningstar, actually. And it was very kind of behaviorally informed product. It built this with behavioral science in mind to make it easier to manage people's budget and reach their financial goals. So the ultimate problem is only trying to solve is like, how do you help people manage their money and save more so they reach their goals faster? So we did a lot of different user research and understanding what are some of these barriers that tend to prevent people from saving how much that they want. And one kind of hypothesis that we had was that the team had was that despite having lots of information about how to save money, a lot of people just weren't really sure how much they should be saving, or how they stacked up, or what's kind of a good savings rate, what's a good investment rate, like where do they stand in these positions. So they developed this idea of kind of coming up with what they call a wellness score. So ultimately they worked out this behavioral insight that ultimately people are pretty sensitive to what other people are doing. We're sort of competitive and we adapt to social norms of the people around us. We want to kind of keep up with everyone else and not be below average. So, and we also kind of need framing and anchors. We need to have kind of an anchor and a frame of, what is good saving? Like how much money should I have saved? So they developed this thing called a wellness score, where they built this kind of algorithm to take a bunch of their financial information, from their accounts in the product, and calculate this score out of 100 points of how well they did. And not only just give the score, but it also said how that score compared to their peers. So a lot of people got this and noticed that their score was considerably lower than the average for their demographic. So we ran the team ran a randomized experiment with this feature to see how much it actually impacted savings behavior. And they found that the group that got the intervention here of the wellness score almost immediately within 1 month added $600 more on average to their savings and investment accounts from their checking, so they could catch up and improve their score. So this is an example of what we call product optimization, where we kind of take these behavioral lessons that we have and apply them to our products so we can iteratively boost the impact on the lives of our users. So ultimately, what we want to know is we want to understand what these barriers are, and when we've developed this product, we kind of have an idea of what those are, but we still don't fully know how to solve all of these problems that come up with our users. So while we can leverage some of the theory of psychology and behavioral science, that can only get us so far. We also have to know that we need to take the theory and our best ideas and really put them to a test in the systematic way and really measure the impact of those products. Something that's kind of broken down into 3 key areas. There's researching and understanding users' needs, which is kind of a common user research and qualitative research, and then using kind of the relevant psychology concepts and literature to devise solutions to those problems, and then ultimately rapidly creating, testing, and iterating on those solutions to find what really works. Okay, I see a question here about Fitbit users. I'll jump into this. So Fitbit users on average only use the product for 6 weeks. Many of these intention action gap products have the same problem. Yeah, I think that's a common problem for almost every product, which is staying sticky and keep people using it long term. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get into the Q&A section. We'll go back to that. So ultimately, this is really kind of getting beyond a lot of the typical way we think about products and our users, and really getting into the why. We want to really deeply understand our users and the decision-making process that leading them to use and engage with our product, and really become clear on what those behavioral obstacles are to engagement. And that can come from user research and measuring user behavior. So we define these obstacles. We really want to go beyond outlining not only what happens within the product, but also what happens outside of the product. So when someone decides to use this product or to find it, what's the internal need that triggers their desire to search for and acquire this? And what's that need that drives them to keep using it? How will they find it and choose it? And most importantly, what change in the user's life will occur after they do engage with this product? And then most importantly, first, then we devise solutions to that using what we know about behavioral science. So we can pull a lot of things from a lot of the classic books from behavioral science and behavioral economics to kind of influence some of the solutions that we can create to these user problems. And then we can use some of the behavioral practices. So this is an example, this picture of the Create funnel, which is a book called Designing for Behavior Change. And this is kind of a systematic way of looking through a user behavior and figuring out where they're getting stuck and devising solutions based on behavioral science and research to understand that. So then we use this to really understand the how. We use kind of behavioral science to understand the why and the how. So how can we actually solve this problem? How can we devise solutions that we ultimately test? So then we take these and we test and iterate very quickly. So this is kind of the common, especially conversion Excel readers know that how important optimization is. So we want to do the same thing, this kind of same optimization process with these solutions that we think can help improve user behavior and help get them to where they want to go. Because again, like we can pull a lot of these great examples from these classic psychology books, but we'll never really know if that same theory or intervention works on our user base until we actually test it and measure its impact. So ultimately, how do you apply this? How do you apply this kind of product optimization process? Well, first you want to understand the psychology that's relevant for the product area and for users. So the relevant behavioral concepts, there's a few kind of common ones. First of all, there's a couple of books I really recommend for people on products. Hooked by Nereal is an awesome book about kind of like habit formation and why we keep coming back. So to the question about kind of Fitbit users and people using products long term, this book kind of goes in depth about why we use products over and over and over again. And then there's Designing for Behavior Change, which is actually written by my boss, Steve Wendell. And it's kind of goes really in depth about some of the psychology behind products and most importantly, the system to actively implement them and measure their impact. So for one, I really recommend checking out these books for both kind of the background psychology and how to actually implement a lot of this stuff. But there's a few kind of key psychology concepts as well. So I want to make sure we understand like friction and hassle factors, like just the things that impede action and complications of a product, and ultimately figure out how we can really reduce the steps to the ultimate behavior that users want to engage in to the simplest form. And we also want to understand how we can make it really intuitive. We know through we call dual process theory, we have like two systems of thinking, system one and system two. And system one is kind of our intuitive mind, kind of natural habit formation area that we spend most of our time in. So we want to make sure our product speaks that intuitive mind and doesn't get us out because the more confusing it is and the more non-intuitive it is, the less likely they will be to take action. We also want to understand how people react emotionally to products. We know that ultimately a lot of our decisions are really based on emotion. We use kind of data and facts to justify the emotional decision we've already made. So I understand that people are swayed by those things, and then make sure that we create output in our products that's enjoyable to use and actually engages with those kind of emotional responses. And then ultimately, you want to really understand what's going on in the subconscious. So you can mention, we want to really know the why of why people are trying to change some particular behavior or why they chose this product to do that. Because there's a lot going on the surface that generally we're not aware of. And we have to really understand that to really help our users out. And then once you know the psychology, it's kind of the research practices to like really assess the impact of all of these kind of behavioral solutions that we use. So again, I think this group and the Reach Conversion XL is pretty well versed in a lot of this stuff. So this is just taking us probably out of marketing and into the product area. But if you're looking for, Conversion XL is a great resource for all of this. But there's also a few books here. Uncontrolled is really good introduction to kind of our randomized experiments and how they can be applied within organizations. Innovators Hypothesis is similar, and then it also involves a lot of statistics to understand the research part of it. So Naked Statistics is a book I really recommend for an introduction to that. All right, so that covers both of the product portions. Now we'll get into marketing, which I'm sure a lot of people in this audience tend to focus on for the most part. So as we all know as marketers, successful companies need a great product, but that's kind of table stakes. A great product is only the first step. You also have to be able to effectively communicate to potential customers how that product actually solves these problems that they want to solve and why it is that they should spend money and time on your particular solution. And we know that more than ever in the digital age, we're bombarded with more messaging than we ever have been. So it's never been more crucial to really understand how to cut through the noise and craft communications that resonate with your target audience. So thankfully, with behavioral science, we have a lot of ways of solving this and then a process of doing so. So again, to kind of lead off an example, so this is something from my work at Morningstar where we had this problem with a retirement product that we had. So we partnered with an employer, and they were going to provide this retirement solution that kind of helped people plan and save for their retirement. They're going to provide that to their employees as kind of an HR benefit. So we had to go ahead to share this tool, but it was on us to kind of send the communication out to to get people enrolled in the product. So the marketing team had kind of started using this kind of basic template here for, it's an email, but this was like their direct mail template, which they mailed to all these employees of this company. And it didn't really get much of a response. People tend to pretty much ignore it. So we're kind of wondering why that is. And we kind of realized that, well, none of these people actively signed up for this product from Morningstar themselves. It's their employer that signed them up for this. So they probably just think it's spam. Like they have no idea who we are. They don't know why we're sending something to them. Like there's no real reason for them to open this. So we want to think out how we could get around that. How can we get past that kind of intuitive reaction of this is spam? So somebody thought it came down to a kind of personalization and social proof, where we had to prove to them that this was something that their employee was providing to them to be a value add for them. So all we did was take the exact same thing and add the logo of the company that they worked for, and we saw a 300% boost in uptake of the product just by adding that logo. Because again, it kind of cut through that intuitive reaction and showed right away that this is something that was actually relevant to them and was provided by their employer that they work for. So this is an example of what we call marketing optimization, and this is similar to basically kind of a little more of the behavioral extension of what you consider conversion optimization. So really, it's a lot of the same concepts and methods I discussed in the product section, but using different tools in a different stage of the company's relationship with the consumer. So ultimately, it's taking all these behavioral lessons that we know and finding the most effective ways of reaching and engaging with current and prospective customers about the products that can answer those problems. So again, we want to really understand and research the potential customer and client's needs. So a lot of this involves, lead generation, finding new customers. So we have to understand their state before they have our product. And then we need to know the relevant psychology literature to kind of communicate and connect with the correct solutions. And then again, rapidly create those communications and test and iterate them on marketing campaigns and systems. So again, this is similar to what I covered in the product section, and this group especially is pretty well versed in kind of optimization methods in the marketing area. So a lot of the same thing where we go a little bit deeper. We want to really understand the why and the how people are doing these things at different parts of the funnel, different parts of our relationship with the customer. And again, we can use behavioral science for potential solutions, but they're kind of some different concepts than what we might cover in the product. A lot of it's about communication, like what resonates with people, what cuts through the noise, catches people's attention. How do people actually make choices? So I'll mention a couple of resources at the end of this section. For example, we know that very small. If we're thinking about how people make decisions and make choices, timing is a very big factor into how people make decisions. So in this example, this is from a study that researchers did with judges who were granting parole, and they noticed really consistent pattern of the judges would grant parole with a pretty high rate, and then as time went on, it would dip down, and then it would jump back up and go back down, jump back up. And they're really confused about why there was this consistent pattern. And it turned out there was all just food. It was hunger. So like when people were hungry and their blood sugar was low, they tend to be a lot less forgiving for this sort of thing. And something like granting parole is a pretty big decision. And these judges are very well-trained professionals, but something as subtle as being hungry actually made a pretty big difference in the way they made those decisions. This is an example of the type of psychology we want to consider when we're marketers, as marketers, and trying to communicate with people. And that all these very subtle things affect when people are actually going to pay attention to us and when they're going to be ready to take action on what we're offering. And then, of course, once we figure out the psychology and those sorts of things, as you all know, we have to test and iterate quickly. We got to run A/B tests and experiments and research to understand what's actually working and what's not, and always question our assumptions. So what to do? Again, we want to understand the psychology that's relevant to kind of the marketing optimization realm here. So the kind of few key areas are kind of communication. We want to understand how different messaging resonates with people and what actually drives them to action via communication. And we want to have a deeper understanding of the customers that we have, and how they make choices. Understand kind of the friction that prevents them from taking action from the initial purchase to getting the value they intend from the product. And really understanding attention. Like I said, there's more noise than ever. So what is it that causes things to resonate through all that noise and capture people's attention? So a few good books on this topic. The Business of Choice is a really good resource that kind of covers kind of the high level of a lot of how this behavioral concepts resonate specifically with marketing and how people choose products. The Age of Propaganda is one of my favorite psychology books. It's all about kind of communication and kind of persuasion and how different communications tend to affect our choices, both in good ways and in bad ways. And then, of course, I'm sure most people are familiar with Cialdini and influence, which is one of the classics and something every marketer should know. And past the psychology, we've got to do the same sort of research process that I discussed in product and that you all do as conversion optimizers. So you want to run RCTs and A/B tests and really test what works. And again, there's a few books here that are helpful with that if you're new to that. And again, definitely use Conversion XL's resources. They have some of the best they probably have the best non-academic experiment and testing content that I found. I share that a lot with a lot of our teams around here to get to know the basics. All right, so that covers marketing. So we have one more section here in kind of organization operations, and then we'll conclude and we'll get to some questions. So we've done all this and we have a good product and effective marketing, then a company is, it's well on its way to success. But ultimately, to build on that success and really maintain it, we have to make sure that it's operating effectively for all these systems that we have to really flourish. So a company can use behavioral science to optimize how it operates and how it makes strategic decisions internally. So consider an example that every company works with, which is hiring people. So this is really one of the most important and frequent decisions that companies tend to make. Any entrepreneur or business owner knows that the people really make the difference. Like, you need a good team around you for success. But then, flip that around and think about how it is that we actually go about hiring people generally. Well, the interview process, we do interviews, right? And that process may include some technical questions and some kind of case studies, but ultimately we mostly evaluate candidates by how good of an interviewer they are, which for most roles is kind of an irrelevant skill. So ultimately, this kind of process of just having these discussions with people and asking them kind of like random questions, like that doesn't really effectively evaluate candidates for the work that they'll actually be hired to do. So Daniel Kahneman, who's kind of the father of behavioral economics and wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow and won a Nobel Prize for his research into human decision-making, he noted the ineffectiveness of this process during his time in the Israeli army. So when they were assigning people to different groups and they were kind of, recruiting new people to join the army, he noticed how flawed people really relied just on intuition for that. And that was a pretty flawed system for choosing who to do what in something as important as kind of an army infantry. So using what he knew about psychology and decision-making, he proposed implementing a very simple somewhat data-driven process to counteract that intuition and make more effective personnel choices. So what he suggests is that you just select some key traits or skills that are necessary for the role. Like he says, usually no more than 6. You want to really narrow down the top 4, 5, or 6 traits that this employee needs to have. And then craft your questions directly evaluating those traits and how well they can actually implement those skills that they need. So what you do is you interview people on each one of these skills, and then you give them a number rating of how well qualified and how well they perform in each of these actual criteria that you set ahead of time. So when the interviews are done, you add up everybody's scores and you go with the candidate that has the highest score. So this isn't a perfectly scientific assessment, but it does counteract a lot of the biases that tend to sway us in choosing who we want to work for. So rather than just the person who kind of charms you in the interview, you might find that they might not actually be the most technically qualified for a developer job that you're trying to hire for. So this is actually something that we've implemented in our team. We hire people and tend to get pretty surprising results. Like you might really enjoy speaking with somebody and kind of have a good personal connection with them. But then we kind of go back and measure their technical aptitude. There's not as strong as another candidate who might be a little more shy and a little less comfortable in an interview setting. So this is an example of kind of a system that you can create to kind of optimize the decision making throughout the company. So this is what we call kind of like organization operations and how to effectively optimize the decisions within a company's operations. You can create a system like that for really any kind of regular decision that happens within an organization. Ultimately, it's kind of a process for creating the same sort of data-driven culture you expect in the technical parts of the company, but doing that in every other aspect of it, like strategy, hiring, all these other areas, to help kind of counteract all the many biases and heuristics we have that tend to sway the way we make decisions in business. So as we know from behavioral research, there's kind of an unending list of cognitive biases, and all of these affect how we tend to make decisions. And in a business where you're making a lot of important strategic decisions often, really ultimately a business is a big collection of decisions made about a lot of different people. So if you're not kind of being strategic about how people are evaluating and making those decisions, then you're probably just relying on intuition. And we all know that our intuition is often pretty wrong. So ultimately, smart companies recognize this and they create systems and processes that kind of help avoid those more those less thoughtful, less data-driven decisions. So, for example, a lot of these innovative companies have all these are famous for their experimentation and data-driven cultures, where they use data for everything, and they have all these systems in place to evaluate what's working, and what's not. Google, for example, to get back to kind of the hiring example, Google has a whole function called people analytics, where they do a lot of hardcore research on the not only the hiring candidates, but just the performance of everyone in the company, like which teams are most effective, like what kind of traits tend to be the most common among their top performers, what type of incentives do people enjoy and tend to have people work most effectively. So they're constantly evaluating all these things so that ultimately they're kind of, the most important resource, which is their people, is truly optimized. So what to do? So this is kind of a new area, and it's a little less fleshed out than some of the other ones, which are kind of a little more common in business. But ultimately, it's really about going beyond just the technical part of your company and creating a data-driven culture everywhere. So always having some kind of data behind bigger strategic decisions, decisions with human resources and people, and kind of having a lot of these systems in place to kind of counteract a lot of these biases that cloud our decision making, and most importantly, just recognizing a lot of those biases and risks exist. So we know that these certain things are going to cloud our judgment in certain areas. So how can we kind of work around that? How can we recognize that and build a system that helps us avoid it? Okay, so that wraps up the framework here. So let's do a quick conclusion here, and then feel free to start asking any questions you have in the chat box, and I'll go through as many of those as I can. So ultimately, to wrap things up, companies tend to struggle with common problems. We run into a lot of the same things, both in our products and our marketing, or in just our general decision making. And as I mentioned before, humans tend to make a lot of the same problems in decision making pretty regularly. There's a lot of patterns we tend to follow, and businesses do the same thing. So we can take these tools we have from behavioral science and help solve those problems that pop up so regularly. We can take what we know from research, from kind of academic research, and ultimately, the process of research and understanding and how to measure impact and measure what's really going on, and really help solve these problems. So the framework we've come up with is kind of a first attempt at doing this for business. Like I said, this is a very new area, and we're really excited about the potential of this. And this is kind of the first iteration of how we see this working well within a company. So ultimately, it starts with generating products that help solve users' behavioral issues, getting them to where they want to go that they can't do on their own. And then optimizing those products through understanding psychology and research methods. And then optimize our marketing so that when we build this great product that helps improve our users' lives, we actually get the word out and we get it to the right people in an effective way. And then ultimately making sure they're making the best decisions possible within an organization, and kind of avoiding a lot of the intuition that tends to make worse decisions down the line for a business. So we can do this and really make behavioral science a part of our organization's DNA. Really, behavioral science is the study of people, and businesses are all about people. So the more that we can optimize our business for the way people actually think and act, then the better we can perform. And ultimately, this is really kind of leading in the next frontier. This is really the next stage of innovation for this field, and I think for business in general. There's just so much more we can do given this wealth of knowledge we have about how people act and think. We can really be innovators in the field and take this to a new level, and outside of the academia and into the real world, and have both business success and kind of lead business into the next level. So that's it for me. Please, I think I have some extra time for, we have plenty of time for questions. So I'm happy to answer as many as I can. You're also welcome to email me, follow me on Twitter, message me there, or hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm available on all those and happy to connect with people there. So thanks everyone for joining, and ready to get into any questions people have. All right, so first question that I saw popped up earlier is, what is an RCT? So sorry, I probably should define that, but first. So an RCT is a randomized control trial. So if you're familiar with A/B testing, ultimately an A/B test is the kind of technical term for a randomized control trial. But that's basically taking your A and your B version, your control and your intervention, or two versions of something, randomizing the population that gets one or the other, and then measuring the results. But in academia, in research, they call it a randomized control trial. Right. Next question. So how do you go about defining your segment using this behavioral science approach? Do you recommend creating personas? Are you familiar with the jobs to be done approach? Okay, so I'm guessing this is kind of on the user research, so the users of products. So I'm familiar with jobs to be done. Our product teams use kind of that jobs to be done approach a lot. We've also done some work in creating kind of personas because a lot of our products tend to have a pretty very distinct ranges of people that use them. So yeah, I think those same things apply to that, where you want to understand your user, and the way I was kind of describing it was sort of maybe for one core user or one problem, but really a lot of products have a lot of different users. So once you kind of expand your product and you have all these different customers and all these different users, you can follow that same approach to just break that down into segments or personas and have different solutions, different communications. Like you can customize more and more the more advanced you get for all of those different users. So I think it's kind of the same process. It's just breaking that down once you have enough data to work with and inform that to follow that same process for different users. Let me see. See, someone else enjoyed Hooked as a book. I appreciate that. It's a great book and a near good friend of mine. Okay, so this question earlier I touched on a little bit was, so I've read that Fitbit users on average only use the product for 6 weeks. So do any of these intention action gap products have the same problem? So yeah, I think, this isn't just limited to products like Fitbit or these kind of behaviorally informed products. I think that's really an issue for every product. It's a whole different user issue to get people to try something and to get them to sign up for it and have them keep using it overall. Like retention is really hard. And a lot of people think the retention of users is harder than actually, getting new ones. So I think that is a common problem. That's where I think habits are a really big piece of psychology to understand. So you understand how you can make a product a habit and really a part of people's day. And then it also comes down to, like I mentioned, you want to measure the impact of the product. So if a product isn't having a great impact on behavior, or at least not in the way the person who bought it or signed up for it intended it to, then it's going to be hard for them to stick with it if they're not getting the feedback or the results that they want. So I think it ultimately starts with that. You have to provide the results people are looking for, but then at the same time, understand a little bit of psychology of retention and what keeps people coming back. And again, I think Hooked is a really, really good book for reading that. The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg is also a book that summarizes a lot of the habit research and is really good to understand. Can marketers learn to use behavioral science in their jobs, or does an organization need to start employing behavioral scientists? So this is a good question. There's kind of some different schools of thought on how a lot of this should be done. I know for us and our team, our vision is that this is just sort of a part of what everybody does. We've trained, probably more than 100 people in the company, probably way more than that, on general behavioral science methods, on experimental methods, and things like that. I think the ultimate way is hopefully the more and more this stuff becomes common knowledge, the more this is just a part of what people do. And I think the most effective marketers will always understand kind of consumer psychology and how people think. But, as a way of getting started, there's definitely value in having, a team like ours that's people that are more experts in the topic and the field. So that's a good way to get started. And I also think a lot of companies benefit from having someone who is trained in this stuff, especially when it comes to running the, number one, having that intuition of the knowledge base to draw a lot of these solutions from, and even more importantly, to really know the research. So a lot of the outside of basic A/B tests, experiments can get pretty complicated, and then you can't always run experiments, and there's other impact assessment research you want to run. So having somebody who has an intuition, has a really deep understanding of those research methods can be helpful, and ultimately, hopefully, they train everybody else so that it becomes a part of their job. All right, what about behavioral science and PR? What are some good ways, data-driven ways to find out if a story will be sticky for your intended audience? So that's a really good question. I haven't really worked much in the PR area, but I think a lot of that tends to come down to the same sort of topics we see in marketing, which is just communicating. So what are the types of communications that resonate with people, and what has kind of that, and for PR, it's what makes something go viral, or what really captures people's attention. So and I think at the one end, if in PR, it's like knowing that communication psychology to cut through the noise. You can do testing the same way that you test email campaigns and things like that. And then for what makes something sticky for the audience and kind of really remembered, I guess. I would say there's a book, it's by Jonah Berger, I think. It's called Contagious. This book, yeah, that's what it's called. It's called Contagious. I'm pretty sure it's Jonah Berger is the name of the author. But he did a ton of, he's a professor at Wharton, and he pretty much researched the science behind what makes stuff go viral and what makes stuff catch people's attention in that kind of way that PR is looking to get. So that's a good place to start. That's kind of a whole separate area of marketing psychology that I'm not as well versed in. The book I mentioned, The Age of Propaganda, too, talks a lot about media and just how media stands out, how stories influence people. That also provides a lot of info on that. Yep, that is the one, Contagious. Great. It's a very good question. There's another aspect of this that we think about. It's not quite PR, but a little more on the branding side, where for our team, for example, we do a lot of our own original research. So we do that partially because it's important to understand. It advances the field and helps us understand our customer base better. But then we package up that research, and we do speaking, and we do articles. We do a lot of kind of thought leadership, and that kind of establishes our team and ultimately Morningstar as a brand as kind of a leader in this area. So that's another area you can sort of apply a lot of this sort of behavioral stuff, is investing in that sort of research stuff and using that to be kind of a leader in your field and kind of stand out among the industry. All right, any other questions? Recording? Yes, I believe there's recording. So I'm assuming they'll send the recording out once this is done and cleaned up. But yeah, they're definitely recording it. Okay, can you say more? Yeah, so yeah, Dana Riley, Richard Thaler, Heath Brothers. Yeah, those are a lot of the classics of behavioral science. So definitely recommend reading all of those to get to kind of a core understanding. All right, can you say more about applying the behavioral staff to understand customers and make them successful? So I'm thinking, so you mean by staff, like the type of people or the type of, behavioral stuff. Okay, so let me see here. Behavioral stuff to understand customers. So, so behavioral methods for understanding customers. So part of it is kind of the research again. That's more qualitative research methods. So that's like really good surveys, like really good user research, like knowing how to. There's definitely there's a lot of science to that. Like rather, you can't just ask people. So you have questions, you have to kind of know how to ask good leading questions that give you actual real insights into your users. So I think the first part is really understanding that portion of how to like really ask good questions of your kind of users or general customer base. So you can kind of really get to know them better. And a lot of that's just kind of classic user research from UX and classic, survey research, things like that from academia. And then, let's see, what was the other part of it? Stuff to understand customers. So then the other part of understanding is knowing how to really map out like a behavioral flow. So you want to really be able to be good at diagnosing, what is the whole behavioral process to an outcome. So we call these like micro behaviors, like mapping out micro behaviors. So from the stage of when someone has a problem they need to solve to them signing up for the products that you have that solves that problem, how can you map that out, every behavior as specifically in more detail as you can? And then the more detailed you can get that, the more you can understand that, the more you can find like the gaps in that process. And when you find the gaps in that process, that's when you can use some of this behavioral literature to devise the solution. So like we know they get stuck here. We know from behavioral science that, this might be a solution to that. So let's run an experiment to test that out. So ultimately, I think it comes down to knowing good research, qualitative research methods, and really knowing how to map out behaviors as detailed as possible, and knowing how to kind of diagnose where they tend to falter in that process. All right, this means they have limited budgets. How can they use behavioral science to obtain original research regarding customers that they want to target or identify new product development opportunities? What do you mean by SME? Did you define that? Okay. I'm not totally sure. Oh, subject matter expert. There we go. So So with limited budgets, so one thing is like investing in training in this stuff. So you don't, like I said, you don't need like PhDs, and I have some other stuff I've written. We'll probably present on more about kind of the skill sets. I'm writing something right now. It's kind of the skill sets, the technical skill sets that are required for this stuff. So I'll have that out soon. But it hasn't fully been defined yet, but ultimately you don't need like a PhD researcher to do a lot of this stuff. Like really a lot of these things are stuff that a lot of you are probably already doing. Like I said, like if you're reading conversion Excel regularly, then you probably know a lot of the optimization stuff. So then it's just really strengthening that with the background and the kind of psychology, and more the maybe strengthening the research methods a little bit along there, understanding the product a little bit more. But yeah, ultimately you can just get started. Like you don't need an expert full time off the bat. Like just start by reading a lot of the classic books of the field and just really taking notes of which stuff seems to you think would resonate the most with your product and with your business and with your customer base. And then just test those. Like find the best thing when you're in the industry. So researchers in like the academic fields, like they run research because they need to be right. They need to find out what a truth is, or what this kind of fact is that has to be pretty accurate about humans. In a business, we just need to know enough to test something. So like we just need to read through the high level research and find stuff that's interesting enough to test. So I think really just to get started with a limited budget is like take the time to really understand, like read the core psychology books, especially the ones that relate to your industry and your customer base, and figure out what stuff to test, and then make sure you have a good testing program and that you have the ability to test that within your product or within your marketing to start evaluating whether those really work or not. I think that's a really good way to get started. You can get more advanced as time goes on. All right, any other questions? All right, going once, going twice. All right, well, if there's no other questions, then we will give everybody a few minutes of their day back, and definitely, yeah, we'll have the recording up so you can check this out later. And again, my contact information is up here. Definitely would love to hear from people. Feel free to ask me more questions, and I would definitely love feedback on the presentation and how I can make it more useful for an audience like yourself. So thanks everybody. Have a great rest of your day, and appreciate you joining.